Hey folks, today we're going to try and use private keys with Snowflake and DBT Cloud. So we're going to use a private key pair to connect to Snowflake instead of the normal username password stuff here. We're going to switch it over to using private keys. Now, in order to generate one, we can look at Snowflake's documentation here. And then there's two versions we can use. One generates an encrypted one, and one generates an unencrypted one. So they said you can use this no crypting at the end to do that. So we're gonna also switch between them because I've noticed some users switching between an encrypted one and an unencrypted one from time to time. Not sure why, but that's something that happens. So, and that's a little bit tricky to do in DBT Cloud. So let's go ahead and first use an encrypted one. So if we do something like that, I'm going to say encrypted with PWD, and then the password. So an encrypted private key has a password on it. So when we go and use it next, we will have to put in a password. Now let's generate the public key portion of this. So this should be PWD, and then we got password. Okay. So now we have got the private key and the public key. We can go ahead and have a look at that one. So let's look at the private key. And then let's look at the public key. Okay, perfect. So the public key will go into Snowflake. So let's take that. And I'm going to alter the user that I'm going to use. I'm going to add the public key here. And then I'm going to also take the private key. This private key goes into DBT Cloud, right? This is kind of like the password. So we're going to edit. I'll switch this to keypair, then private key, and then put in the passphrase. You can go ahead and use this test connection thing just to see if things work fine. Okay, it's done, and then you can kind of give it a save. Now, what you'll notice here is I kind of pulled out the network tab of my browser. You'll see that there's this, we're actually mutating or modifying this credential object with the ID 453523, right? So when we're changing this credentials here, we are changing credential 453253. Okay, that will come into play later. But just take note that this credential set is 453523. Okay, now we've used that, we've saved it, and we can go ahead and give our job a run. And hopefully that all works kind of as expected without any issues. Oops, got my bill. That's going. Warning, but that's fine. You can see that we connected to DBT. We connected DBT Cloud to Snowflake with a private key that has a passphrase on it. All works fine. Okay. Now, from time to time, users may kind of rotate their private key, and sometimes I find that folks, for one reason or another, they are going to use an encrypted version. So they're gonna use this one, right? So let's generate an unencrypted private key. I'm gonna call this no password. So you'll notice that when we generate an unencrypted key, we don't have to put in password, right? And at the same time, if you generate the public key portion of this, you'll see that you similarly don't need. So you can see that they didn't ask us for a password, because there is no password on this unencrypted one, right? We can have a look at the no password private key, and we can look at the no password public key. Now, again, same as before, the no password public key goes into Snowflake. and we take our private key and we put it in TBT. Now, something very important here, I'm going to use this test connection thing, and we know that you'll probably succeed here, right? However, look at this private key passphrase field. Currently, it is empty, right? We don't set a passphrase because there is no passphrase for it. Now, when we save, we are basically modifying or upsetting this record, right? We are upsetting this credential. The private key passphrase being empty does not mean that we have updated it to be null. In fact, it is using the private key passphrase from our previous credential when there was a passphrase on it, right? So if you go and hit and try to run a job, let's see what happens. So you can see I kind of have error immediately, right? We know it should work. We put in the public key and everything, right? However, what does the error say? The error say password was given, but the private key is not encrypted. So this goes back to what I was saying before about this credential, right? So if you think about this, basically what's happening is, let's say in the background, this was credential, right? So there's credential, and then you can say with password, private key, and then private key passphrase. Okay, so this is passphrase. Okay, so what's happening here is initially when we set up the credential with the private key passphrase, what's happened in the background is we had something like this, right? The credential, there's a private key on it, like this kind of long stuff here. And then we have a password on the private key. So this is how it looks in the database, right? When the credential is being used. Now, what happens when we modify and change it to a private key without a passphrase? What happened is this is the only thing that changed, right? Only this. We didn't null this out, right? So it didn't become null. So essentially, we are now working with this set of credentials, which is a private key with no passphrase and a private key passphrase at the same time, which is why we get the error that you see here. Password was given, but a private key is not encrypted, right? So it in order for this to work, we really need this to be a null, right? We need this to be private key without a password and a null passphrase. So how can we do that? Now, as we can tell, we've kind of simply just modified this. And this doesn't quite work, right? Because this being empty, you can put a private key and this leave this out and you save. What's happening is we do whatever I just said just now, which is this not. Okay, so how can we null that out? Now, the one way to null this out is to change the auth method to something else first, right? So let's say, let's put in some kind of junk here. Like we know this will fail, right? That's fine. And essentially we want to modify the auth method from private key, from keypair, sorry, to something else, which is username and password. So we want to save this. Now in the background, we would have modified this object again. And by modifying that object, so this object is now modified, right, in the background. Now this would have something like the username, which is fake, and some sort of password, right? Uh, that's password. Okay, so now this set of credentials will be something like this, which will not work, which is fine. Okay, so the idea is that we want to reset it into something like this. And then once we do that, kind of just make sure that that switching kind of is set. Great. Now, what we can do then, once we are good, after we have swapped it, is we come back. Maybe you want to also make sure that the username changed, right? So you want to change the username as well. And then now we come back to our real thing, which is the key pair. And then put in our private key again. and leave the passphrase out, right? So this time, what's happened is because the auth method changed again, then we are going to kind of reset this. So now it's going to be now, and it will be as we expect it to be, right? We will have a private key without a passphrase and null as the PK passphrase. So let's go ahead and run, and let's see whether we succeed or not. You can see the calls as well we do to this is kind of a patch, which means we kind of update that stuff here. So you can see this would be that. This would be changing to user pass. This one was when we use the encrypted private key and we set a private key passphrase on it. This is when we modified to a non-passphrase private key, but you can see there was a lack of unsetting of this field. So it didn't get unset. And now, after this changing of the method back and forth, we've got it to work with a private key that has no passphrase on it, right? So if anytime you need to go back and forth between a private key with a passphrase and without a passphrase, you want to make sure you come in here, go to username, put something here, save the form, just so that the patch method on the credential modifies it in the background, right? Make sure you save it so that this is updated. Then you want to come back in, you want to give an edit, change the keypair, and then put in kind of the real stuff, right? Now, note that all this test connection stuff, like it doesn't have anything to do with this patch method of updating the credential. So just don't worry about, like, the test method might say succeed, but when you save and then you run, it doesn't work, right? So make sure you follow this pattern that I've laid out. This is the same stuff for user profiles. So if you go to your credentials, you can also use keypair here, right? So if you find that you need to switch between a private key with and without passphrase, then you want to make sure you go back to username, modify, come back, keypair, and do the whole thing that I just described. And that's all there is to it. It's a bit complicated, but can be done. But in general, you shouldn't be using a private key without a passphrase. So the suggestion is to stick to private key with passphrases. But if you want to switch between them, you kind of have to do this swapping type of deal. Mainly because there's no way to null out a passphrase by itself. Thank you.